right, hello, History 363. So today we're going to be talking about the civil war between Caesar and Pompey, and eventually between Caesar and Pompey's supporters, the Pompeians, as Pompey is killed quite early in the war. But we left off last time with Caesar crossing the Rubicon, the small, shabby river that is the boundary between his province of Cisalpine Gaul and Italy. And of course, crossing the Rubicon, which has entered the English lexicon, is basically taking an action that you can't go back on. Represents Caesar leaving his province illegally and therefore committing himself to civil war. Now, Caesar doesn't bring that many troops with him. He probably only has about a legion. Although a big advantage that Caesar's going to have is that he has the most experienced army overall in the Roman Empire. Men who have been spent the last 8 years honing their skills fighting the Gauls in intense combat situations. Now, in Italy itself, Pompey and his followers, and of course Pompey here has been basically given command by the consuls of all the forces in the Republic. So Pompey, even though in many ways he's really just one warlord against another, nonetheless claims to represent the Republic more broadly and has the support of the Republican government. Even though, and indeed we'll see this is a bit of a problem for Pompey, because it also means everywhere Pompey goes, he has a bunch of senators with him giving their strong opinion on how Pompey should run the war. That said, Caesar's moved with such speed that Pompey really doesn't have the ability to hold Italy itself. There was an attempt by one of his lieutenants, Domitius Ahenobarbus, to blockade Caesar at Corfinium, the old site of the Italian capital of Italica during the Social War. But Caesar makes light work of this blockade, and Pompey and his followers withdraw towards Greece with the understanding that the war will be fought and won in the provinces. It'll be provincial resources that will fuel this war. And importantly, the war will also, that's kind of the human topography of the war, will heavily involve the Roman diaspora. Probably at this point over 100,000 Roman citizens who are living abroad, and they will contribute their political loyalties and money and manpower to this conflict. So already very quickly in 49, Caesar therefore is in control of Italy. He assumes the title of dictator, and this is in part to just give him some kind of emergency constitutional authority. It also allows him to oversee his own election as the consul for 48 BC. Then Caesar opens up the treasury, takes the money that he needs, and just now he needs to decide where to go next. Pompey and a lot of his followers are in the east raising forces, and Caesar decides that rather than going to rapidly try and confront them, he's first going to knock out the important Pompeian bastion in Spain. Remember, Pompey had been given, as part of the settlement of Lucca, a governorship over both of the Spains. So therefore he has armies that he technically still personally commands in the Iberian Peninsula. And Caesar decides to try to knock them out of the fight first, probably actually so he can free up all of his forces to focus on Pompey and his allies in the east. So the war in Spain initially sees some sharp fighting, particularly around the town of Ilerda, but ultimately ends when Caesar pins the main Pompeian army. Or Pompey isn't there personally commanding, but Caesar manages through a series of marches and counter-marches to cut off the main Pompeian army from its supply depot and on the coast and force it to surrender. And so having, therefore, relatively quickly in 49 eliminated Pompey's forces in Spain, Caesar subsequently moves against Massilia, it's a former Greek colony on the coast of southern Gaul that has nonetheless opposed Caesar. Caesar captures and besieges it, and now he is ready to finally make his move against Pompey in 48. Now, that said, at this point, Pompey has actually managed to organize a substantial both naval force and army in the east to face off against Caesar. And this includes, soldiers, people who have left Italy to join Pompey, Romans recruited from the diaspora, and it also just seems provincials who are sort of, press ganged into Pompey's legions. At this point, Pompey has a much bigger army than Caesar. Caesar is still basically relying on his Gallic force that has, over the time in Gaul and beyond, suffered substantial wastage. And of course, Caesar also doesn't have the naval forces. So actually, while he manages to cross his army across the Adriatic and into probably what's now Albania, he nonetheless has a lot of his, he has trouble supplying his army. He confronts Pompey outside of the town of Dyrrachium. Dyrrachium. It's late, guys. It's late. Dyrrachium. Here we actually see basically trench warfare. And this has actually been a trend in Roman military practice that's been going on at least since Sulla, of Roman armies who have always, even in the Middle Republic, dug marching camps that were heavily fortified with ditches and palisades. But now actually the main part of the battle involves less, not just lining up and fighting, but digging earthworks to shape the battle space and try to constrain your enemy. So the fighting at Dyrrachium essentially involves both Pompey and Caesar constructing miles of trenches and earthworks and towers, with Caesar trying to blockade Pompey. However, it actually goes badly for Caesar. In the first major military confrontation between Pompey the Great, arguably Rome's most seasoned and famous commander, and Caesar, Pompey wins. He manages to force a breakout on Caesar's left, capture a number of Caesar's camps, and ultimately forces Caesar to retreat towards Thessaly. And Pompey moves parallel to him. At this point, Pompey is ruined by the terrible advice that he gets from all of the senators who have come along with him to sort of be his counsel. Because Pompey doesn't want to fight Caesar in an open, pitched battle. He really doesn't need to. Caesar's having logistical problems. Caesar's army is numerically inferior. Pompey probably shouldn't risk it. Caesar really wants to actually risk it all in a set-piece battle, in part because he knows his troops are really good at fighting, and in part, he knows that the gamble favors him. That is, a long war, protracted campaign will be bad for Caesar as his army wastes away. And indeed, Caesar sort of tries to, Pompey sort of, in Thessaly, Pompey keeps taking up, really good defensive positions for his armies on high ground, places that Caesar wouldn't want to fight. And Caesar keeps sort of trying to dare him to come out into the open ground and fight on the plain, which would be a mistake for Pompey. And finally, Pompey succumbs. He succumbs to the kind of moral pressure. We need to face Caesar and fight him down. And this leads to the Battle of Pharsalus in 48 BC, fought on the open ground right where Caesar wants to fight. Now, Caesar is both numerically inferior, and he also doesn't have as much cavalry. Pompey actually has raised, apart from all of these sort of nobles and senators and equites who want to fight for the Republic, he's actually raised one of the last large forces of citizen cavalry in Roman military history. So Pompey has a larger army, he has more cavalry, but his army is green. Caesar is smaller, but these guys have been fighting Gauls, over the past decade. Caesar therefore has a plan to counter what he knows will be likely a flanking attack by the Pompeian cavalry. He arrays his line in the kind of traditional Roman triplex acies, although now the main unit of the triplex acies is a larger unit, the cohort, which is basically three maniples glued together, but still arrayed in three lines. But then he detaches a number of cohorts from his third line and places them as a kind of fourth line over on his flank. And this is basically a bulwark against what he knows is going to be a flanking Pompeian cavalry maneuver. Now, the battle begins, and Caesar decides that he's going to advance on the Pompeians swiftly and aggressively. So his soldiers rushing forward. They take a brief tactical pause in the middle of their advance to probably reconstitute and reorganize their units, as units moving forward quickly start to lose their cohesion. But once they reorganize, they then immediately rush again on the Pompeians in a violent assault that Pompey's green troops are probably less able to handle. Pompey notably has arranged his forces in particularly deep formations, and that's actually not a sign of confidence to array your soldiers so deep. It probably is a sign here that Pompey isn't quite sure that they'll hold. The real disaster, though, happens for Pompey when his cavalry charges. He brushes aside Caesar's cavalry, but then the cavalry, again probably becoming itself somewhat discombobulated upon contact with Caesar's cavalry, crashes into the well-organized infantry that Caesar has positioned as a kind of bulwark on his flank. Pompey's cavalry scatters and retreats, and then Caesar's infantry line swings around into the attack, and Pompey's line collapses. It's an utter disaster. Caesar's men capture Pompey's camp that night, and Pompey himself flees with as many of his lieutenants as can get away. And so what follows now is Caesar trying to pursue Pompey as quickly as he can. And in the interest of a speedy pursuit, Caesar ultimately only takes a very small force with him. Really, he's almost on a manhunt trying to capture Pompey. Pompey, with his family, makes way to Egypt, where he hopes he can find the support of the boy king of Egypt, Ptolemy the 13th. Unfortunately, the regents to this boy king think that, well, Caesar's the winner, let's try to earn his favor. And so as Pompey comes ashore in Egypt, he is attacked, actually attacked by two Roman mercenaries, now in Ptolemaic employ. They kill him and they cut off his head. When Caesar arrives in Alexandria, he is presented with the severed head of Pompey. And supposedly he weeps, saddened to see his former son-in-law and former ally and friend, even though they've been bitter enemies. Supposedly Caesar is moved to tears at his death, and also the sort of degradation he suffers in death. Now, Caesar's civil war now intersects with a kind of bumbling civil war between two Ptolemaic monarchs, namely Ptolemy the 13th has a co-monarch, his sister and technically spouse, Cleopatra the 7th. They are not getting along, and in fact, they're fighting a civil war. So while Caesar is staying at the palace complex in Alexandria, Cleopatra managed to have herself smuggled in. She's been out, out in the countryside with her supporters. She has herself smuggled in, supposedly in a rug, to appeal to Caesar. And Caesar, sizing up the situation, seeing Ptolemy the 13th as a bit of a nincompoop, probably not terribly happy that they've just executed Pompey, this Cleopatra is clearly the more talented of the two, decides to support Cleopatra's claims. Ptolemy the 13th leaves the palace, and Caesar and the small number of troops he's brought with him are actually then besieged by forces loyal to Ptolemy the 13th. And this siege lasts until finally auxiliary forces sent by some of Caesar's allies provide reinforcements, allowing Caesar in 47 to confront Ptolemy the 13th with a small army, defeat him in a battle on the Nile. Ptolemy the 13th is killed, and now Caesar has successfully installed Cleopatra the 7th as the unquestioned queen of Egypt. Caesar spends about 3 months with her afterwards, kind of as a vacation. They initiate a sexual relationship that produces a child, who Cleopatra names Caesarion. While Caesar is known actually in Rome as a sexual adventurer, having a relationship with a Hellenistic queen that produces a child, I would say, is actually politically a deeply transgressive act for Caesar. He, of course, has a lawful Roman wife at home during this period, but I would say this is more than adultery. Clearly, if you are making love and then a child with a queen, Caesar is starting to see himself, I think, on a much higher plane than just wronged Roman magistrate, which is initially how he presents himself in another book that he writes, his commentaries on the civil wars. he makes it very clear that he doesn't see himself at this point as would be dictator or ruler or king, but he sees himself simply as a wronged magistrate trying to fight for his rights. Disingenuous, yes, but that's how Caesar presents himself. And of course, those commentaries end with the Battle of Pharsalus. Now, after Caesar leaves Alexandria, he goes into the east, where he is arranging the eastern provinces to his liking. Many of these shifts are minor, but remember, the eastern provinces had been organized by Pompey, so Caesar wants to make sure that he gets a chance to make things the way he wants them. During this moment in 47, he faces another challenge from a son of Mithridates VI, our poison king, who had been holding up in leftover territories up in around the Crimea. But now Pharnaces says, wow, the Romans are in disarray, there's a civil war, this could be my chance to reclaim some of my father's holdings on the southern part of the Black Sea. So Pharnaces invades with a small army. Caesar famously rushes north to meet him, fights him at a battle at Zela, beats him, and then celebrates this swift victory later in his triumph in 46 with placards that say, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I came, I saw, I conquered. And then with this, he goes back to Rome. Now, that being said, the civil war isn't over. And Caesar, I think, very much hopes it would be, that Pompey is dead, he's reordered the east to his liking, but Pompeian forces are reconstituting in both North Africa and in Spain. So in 46, Caesar goes to North Africa, where he faces these Pompeian forces who have allied themselves with the king of Numidia. Here, two of the key players are Cato the Younger and Metellus Scipio, the latter who had been the father-in-law of Pompey. A bloody battle is fought in North Africa at Thapsus, in which both sides use elephants. Caesar, however, wins, and subsequently Cato the Younger and Scipio commit suicide. Cato's suicide being later taken as a kind of act of protest, or emblematic act of protest of the citizen of a free republic against a tyrant. Cato the Younger, I think, is actually less of a good citizen of the free republic, but nonetheless, he does kill himself rather than be taken prisoner by Caesar. So having defeated the Pompeian forces in North Africa, Caesar again returns to Italy. However, in 45, he now moves with his forces to Spain, where the sons of Pompey have reconstituted an army, indeed flipping some of the legions that had sworn an oath of loyalty to Caesar way back in 49. Caesar therefore fights another bloody battle at Munda, which supposedly his forces successfully attack uphill, which is kind of a rare thing to do successfully in pre-modern combat, and inflict massive casualties on the Pompeians, basically breaking the last bastion of Pompeian support. Only one son of Pompey survives, Sextus Pompey, and with this, Caesar now really faces no organized opposition from the Pompeians. So he's therefore back in Rome in 44. Now, this whole time, Caesar has been essentially alternating in terms of how Caesar is constitutionally defending his power. He's alternated between being dictator and being consul. And it's kind of 1 year off, 1 year on. One reason it seems that he revives the dictatorship is just to sort of give himself a break in between consulships, so that it doesn't look like he's monopolizing the consulship, every year, as say Marius had done. It also allows him to open up consulships to give supporters. So Caesar's been dictator, he's been consul, he's been dictator, he's been consul. By 44, however, he has had himself declared dictator in perpetuo. Dictator for perpetuity. This is probably an escalation. Indeed, when Caesar returns to Rome for good after defeating the last of the Pompeian forces, it seems that he starts to take a high view of his power and presents himself as something other than just a normal Roman civil magistrate. Indeed, there is a moment at the Lupercalia, religious festival that kind of has a sort of very festive atmosphere to it. His lieutenant Mark Antony makes an attempt to crown him with a diadem, and then the crowd boos, and Caesar waves Antony off like, what are you doing? Get out of here. Come on, go away, man. And then Antony tries again, the crowd boos, and Caesar's like, get the hell out of here. Now this seems to be a setup, in that it may be that Caesar is perhaps testing what would be the public response if I was offered monarchic powers. The diadem is essentially the crown. It's just basically a ribbon or a tie that's worn around the head, but it's the crown of Hellenistic kings or queens like Cleopatra. So Caesar seems to be kind of testing public opinion, but then he can safely say, when everyone's booing, Mark Antony, he's just a drunk, at the party, and of course I don't want to be king. But he also is going around wearing triumphal garb, the garb of a Roman triumphator, a special sort of dyed toga. This, again, is offensive to the Senate. And again, seems to mark out Caesar as someone with exceptional, extraordinary powers. Certainly, to be declared dictatorship in perpetuo suggests that Caesar doesn't. Sulla, remember, had said, "I'm going to retire, and then he retired. Caesar makes it pretty clear that he's not going to retire. What he wants, though, is essentially another command, and he gets himself a command against the Parthians to try and avenge the loss suffered by Crassus. But it seems that many Roman senators, including people who had been his supporters, start to feel that if Caesar leaves in 44 to take another army that will be personally loyal to him and come back battle-hardened, that they will never rid themselves of Caesar. And so a plot is hatched, led by Marcus Junius Brutus and Cassius Longinus, and on the Ides of March in 44 BC, Caesar is stabbed to death by a group of senators, and that's the end of Caesar. Supposedly stabbed 23 times, obviously sort of one of the more dramatic and famous moments in Roman history. So that's the end of Caesar. Next time we'll talk about the aftermath of that death. I just want to end by briefly talking about a couple of important reforms that Caesar does undertake as dictator. Indeed, it seems that, as with Sulla, he had seen his dictatorship as not just a way of cementing his power, but it justified it as, I need to reform the Republic, reconstitute the Republic. One reform that actually sticks, one reform that we still live with today, is Caesar institutes a new calendar. So the old Republican calendar had 355 days. And the Romans knew that didn't actually line up with the solar year. So what had to happen is that to keep things from getting out of whack, every so often, every year or two, a intercalary month would be inserted to bring everything back. Now, after a while, this insertion becomes controversial because it means some magistrates get more time in office, some people get longer commands. So these months sometimes don't get inserted, which means the seasons start to get out of whack. And indeed, this leads to a problem for us historians, is sometimes it's not always clear to us, in what year in our terms something took place in the Roman Republic. Sometimes we'll even see years sort of marked with 82/81. It's because we just don't know the exact year, because the Republican calendar is gone a bit off the rails. So Caesar fixes that, says, nope, we're going to have a 365-day calendar with a leap year, and that calendar will hold until the 16th century, when they realize they have to make a minor correction to keep up for the fact that even with the leap year, you need a slightly bigger correction. But anyway, see, the fact that the 365-day year is the calendar that we use today. That is a reform of Caesar that literally impacts you every time you go to your calendar to see what's, when your next midterm is. Other big reform, and I think we'll leave on this. Caesar founds veteran colonies to settle his veterans. He does this in a purely self-interested way, but these are largely founded abroad. And this is the reform that this is a solution to the problem of Roman agrarian overpopulation that it's almost surprising the Romans didn't come up with earlier. Take land in the provinces that you've taken from the people that you've conquered and put Romans there. That solves a lot of your problems. Caesar finally does it on a large scale. And that includes the formal refoundation. 2 of these big colonies are going to be founded at cities that have been destroyed exactly a century before. So Caesar founds a major colony at Corinth and also a large colony at Carthage. And indeed, it's this Caesarian foundation that will make Carthage, again, one of the most important and flourishing cities of the Mediterranean. And other veteran colonies also across the Mediterranean. So this act, which Caesar just does because he has veterans, they need land, there's land in the provinces, but this solution going forward is going to be critical to finally solving the agrarian problems that we've seen since the time of Tiberius Gracchus. All right, so Caesar is dead, stabbed 23 times. Next time we'll talk about how his successors emerge and how this ultimately leads to another civil war, or actually 2 more civil wars that ultimately destroy the Free Republic. We'll talk more soon.